when I first got the call to join you guys here today, I was so exciting, like to join you today, this afternoon, on this topic with this amazing room of female leaders. It's like my favorite thing to do. What Sally asked us to cover on this panel on energy storage is a few things, including what is storage, why is it a game changer, how is it a game changer, and how are women in storage an essential ingredient. So before we dive into that, I'd just like to do a really quick survey. How many folks here have ever been to, say, an energy storage conference? A little quick show of hands. How many folks in this room have heard about more than Tesla, like more than one company in energy storage? Okay, that's good. How many of you principally work in the power sector for your primary work? So a lot of savvy energy folks. Okay, great. That's helpful context, and I assume it's from a variety of backgrounds. Well, when we talk about energy storage on this panel, and it's a little bit different, we're not going to go deep into the many different types, but I did want to set the context and say that when we refer to energy storage, we're thinking of it broadly as an asset class. So, generation is an asset class. There's many different types. There's gas generation, coal generation, nuclear, wind, solar, tidal wave. Energy storage, similarly, is an extremely diverse asset class that can do many, many things in the power sector, transportation sector, and industrial sectors. Why is it a game changer? Well, what's interesting about our power sector is, and it's truly a marvel, actually, it's a miracle that we can flip on the lights and they always go on, that we've built this amazing system that is more or less predicated on the idea that energy cannot sort of easily be stored. So we have this system where supply must always equal demand, but we've been able to engineer this in a way where we've kind of overbuilt supply and demand just kind of is there. Because supply historically has been pretty predictable, pretty dispatchable. Well, in comes this amazing thing called the sunshine, the wind, and one of the great tipping points in the last several years is renewable energy has become really inexpensive. It's very accessible, and it is the lowest cost, marginally the lowest cost form of electricity in many parts of the world. Challenge is, when sun's shining, when the wind's blowing, it's not necessarily when we're all turning on our toasters. So the game changer is, how do we match that energy supply to our demand, and in comes energy storage, very simplistically. So many different applications, from short duration, maintaining grid reliability moment to moment, to very long duration, shifting from many hours, say, of solar during the day to moving it to the evening. When you get to very high penetrations of energy storage, then we start needing even multi-day. So how do we get to a point where we're only using renewable energy? How do we get to a point where maybe, not only from day to day, but season to season? So then there's even different types of storage there. So this is an application. It's an asset class that's extremely broad, has many, many applications in the power sector and transportation sector and industrial sector. It's also an industry that, because storage touches every silo in our power sector, for example, it's also ripe for innovation, and how do we use this asset very creatively and under many different business models. So for all those reasons, it's diversity, application, business models, innovation, which we're going to hear from, not only technically, but regulatory innovation. I think it's a really exciting field, and I hope some of you will decide to jump in with both feet and help us out, because there's a lot of work to be done. So that is my quick overview, and what I'm going to do is ask each one of my esteemed panelists here to introduce themselves, take about 5-6 minutes to introduce themselves, their background, why you got into storage, what you do today, what your organization does, but really to emphasize, like, why? Like, what is the motivating force that gets you out of bed every day? And I'll just kick it off by sharing my why statement of why I do the work that I do is it's about impact. And I think with energy storage and the combination of really low-cost, plentiful, renewable energy, there is the potential to make a stepwise impact in this lifetime to help decarbonize the planet. And I don't mean just the power sector, but a whole bunch of other sectors. And to me, that's extremely, extremely motivating. So, oh, and I'm sorry, there was one other short story I left off because Sally asked me to say, why are women really important? Having been in this industry for a really long time, like 20 years, one of the things I've noticed is so often when it comes to really big innovation and real change, like change that requires thinking out of the box, getting along with disagreeing parties, really women were at the root of it. And just tiny digression, California was one of the leaders in starting energy storage. I see Commissioner Peterman back there. Hi, Carla. But just tiny history, you know, California has made a lot of news in energy storage, and this won't take more than 30 seconds, I promise. Our first legislation that really opened the door to energy storage, it was written by Attorney General Brown's attorney, one of his lead attorneys, Sandy Goldberg. She was actually the one who did pen to paper. That draft legislation went to Sacramento. Senator Nancy Skinner authored the legislation and you know, took it through the legislative process. After the legislation was signed into law, Commissioner Carla Peterman was the assigned commissioner who led the rulemaking that resulted in our targets. And then, of course, I was leading the industry association, so it was really a whole string of women that made change happen in energy storage, and I see that all over the place. So another reason I'm super excited to be here. So with that tiny digression, I do want to start with Catherine, and I want you guys to think of all your questions, because we're going to attempt to integrate your questions as much as possible with this amazing, diverse panel of exceptional women. So go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here and have a chance to speak to this amazing audience and conversations already. So my background is in biomedical research, environmental conservation, working with the Department of the Interior to consider land management outside of extraction industry, health and human services. I've worked in policy, for-profit, nonprofit. I've had a very circuitous path. I don't recommend it, but it's what I followed in terms of my interest and my own growth. I have a very strong sense of advocacy in anything I've done, whether it was biomedical research or what I'm doing now in energy storage, is always about making a positive impact on the planet and for the people that will use the resource, the service, or the product. Some of that is in my family. My great-grandfather founded the Salvation Army in England. His wife, Catherine, and his daughter, Catherine, my namesake, crusaded through the streets of London and ultimately France and Switzerland. They were stoned and they were imprisoned. And the message then was really empowering people who had been left by the Church of England and other institutions. And amazingly, General Booth spoke to the moral failing of a society that forces women into prostitution, that it's not a moral failing of a woman who is left without resources, and in that case, education and the right to own property and to earn a living. That was in 1840 in his seminal book, In Darkest England and the Way Out. I carry some of this with me. I think it's in my DNA, and so it speaks to why I'm doing what I'm doing today. In 2010, I had a chance meeting, and I met our CTO, Stuart Lennox, and he had innovated some of the first lithium-ion batteries that provided off-grid power. He was working in the film and movie industry, and when I saw these portable power packs that were efficient and non-toxic, harnessed the power of the sun, but also displaced diesel, or could optimize diesel, be charged with wind, and be plugged into the grid, it was this phenomenal platform that was small and modular. And what I envisioned was to begin to scale that platform technology and leverage it and develop it for people all over the world that are marginalized because they live beyond large centralized top-down distribution systems. Stuart Lennox was one of the first innovators around a clean, environmentally benign lithium-ion chemistry, lithium iron phosphate. We do not use cobalt, and in this field today, there's still a lot of concern and confusion on what lithium-ion means. Lithium is not toxic, cobalt is, and cobalt is the ingredient that causes thermal runaway, fires, requires a lot of ancillary, unnecessary equipment for cooling and thermal monitoring. So Stuart had begun innovating around this platform, and as a company founding in 2010, it was so important that we thought about impact and empowerment for communities that we would work with all over the world, but also the entire supply chain cradle to cradle. We were not interested as a company to work with cobalt, and yet lithium cobalt that's still being used in the industry today is cheaper and it's easier to access. So we founded a company in 2010 manufacturing in California, one of the most expensive places on the planet that you can manufacture, choosing a newer innovation in chemistry and innovating and developing our IP around that and our manufacturing processes. But the fact that we had more expensive technology and made this choice forced us to innovate an energy storage solution that no other competitor could provide. And while we thought that we would work with NGOs and rural electrification and other types of enterprises, it was the Department of Defense that came to us in 2010 and 11 because of the difficulties they were having on forward operating bases in Afghanistan and Iraq. Often lead-acid batteries, then the storage incumbent, they were dead on arrival because of temperature sensitivities. They're anywhere between 5 to 6 times the size and weight of what we produce, and they failed. And the other issue was the early generation based on cobalt, the lithium-ion batteries still being used by some of our biggest competitors in the industry today, caught fire, exploded, and were not safe, putting troops at risk. The truth is the convoys bringing in fuel for diesel on forward operating bases, there were more lives lost because of those convoys. So the DoD gave us a chance. We got some POs and we began to rapidly prototype and develop mobile infrastructure systems, microgrids, nanogrids on trailers pulled behind Humvees, 2-people power lifts, allowing stealth operations, eliminating toxicity, not using the child labor and other conflict elements behind cobalt, and really proving out our technology, going through some of the most rigorous testing, certainly in the world, certainly in the US as well, partnering with the Marine Corps and the US Army. So when I look at our company today, we're in 45 countries. We work with utilities. We work in the commercial and industrial space. We work in residential. We work on-grid and off-grid. And again, it's all about the impact that we're having in empowering communities to become their own generators and active participants in their own resource generation. When you have power, you have water, filtration, you have food, you have irrigation systems, you have medical care, you have lighting for schools. We work with schools and hospitals, enterprises globally to really engage in this empowerment. And again, always looking at the entire supply chain from extraction to recycling. And I guess the last point I'll make is, so our company really was about creating access to energy and other resources that brings, but also building a company from the ground up on the triple bottom line. actually executing on the triple bottom line. We have not raised VC money. We're probably the only energy storage company that is profitable. Founded in 2002, profitable by 2012, doubling year over year, tripling last year, and we're still waiting to see what happens this year. So I guess one of my messages is triple bottom line is more than rhetoric, and to build a company, it's very difficult, but it is possible, and that's part of what we're proving out in the innovation here is around our business model and how we work and finance projects, as well as the people in the communities that we're making an impact.
Wow, thank you. Betar?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, to hear all the wonderful discussion and to share my story and my path with you. I did not grow up taking apart toasters, and I am in mechanical engineering. In fact, all my degrees are from mechanical engineering, but I've taken a wandering path, and I've actually worked in different disciplines along the way. Now that I'm a faculty member in mechanical engineering at MIT, and I'm on the admissions committee, and now that I get to learn a lot about other people's pathways, I see that I perhaps I'm a little bit different in that I didn't play with Legos and I wasn't attracted to engineering at a young age. That came actually a bit later on for me. And I'm seeing that actually a bit more and more as I interact with students, and especially young women now who are interested more and more in engineering and in energy. So my path to a technical career was a little bit more philosophical. It's not to say that I didn't like doing those things or I didn't like technical things, but I was very much interested in other things. For a while, I wanted to go into literature. My hero was Ernest Hemingway, not necessarily for his personal lifestyle, but for his writing capabilities. And this felt accessible to me. This is what we sort of did in high school. You are immersed in literature. That's what we seems like a feasible step to us somehow. It was really personal tragedy that caused me to take a step back and think about what was really interesting and worthwhile and also challenging and rewarding. My father passed away from cancer when I was in high school, and he was an engineer. And I didn't actually ever get to know him in the capacity of us both being engineers. That came later. As a result of his passing away, in the process of going through that, I took a hard look at the choices that he had made and why he had chosen that career path. And so I actually the next year was my senior year, and I said, I'm going to take physics and kind of see if I can understand a little bit more about what this whole engineering thing is about. And I wound up really falling in love with it. And I wound up applying to MIT and being accepted, and I went there for undergraduate 2 years later. So I got involved in a number of experiences when I was there, but the most impactful was a research experience in the area of electrochemistry. So I was always in mechanical engineering, but exploring other disciplines. So I, over the years, was involved in a couple of different research topics that wound up sort of all being very influential on me and teaching me a lot about the subject. So as an undergraduate student, I worked on proton exchange membrane fuel cells. I did my senior thesis in that area. I actually rather fortuitously wound up embarking on a long-term research project as an undergraduate that spanned 2.5 years. So I had the chance to actually get through the initial hurdles where you're basically somebody's lab technician and really sort of start to see the rewarding aspects of posing and answering your own questions. So I wound up staying actually in the same laboratory throughout my master's and my PhD. But I transitioned to some different topics. So for my master's, I worked on electrochemical capacitors. And then finally, for my PhD, I spent a couple of years working on beyond lithium-ion technologies, lithium air or lithium oxygen batteries. So this was an incredibly rewarding and challenging experience, intellectually very stimulating. This was a field that sort of blew up around well, that's maybe not the right word to use, but in terms of really attracting attention and enthusiasm, it became a very compelling field to work on right around the time that I started, and it went through a very big expansion and then ultimately a contraction more or less the year or so after I left the field and went on to a postdoc in another topic. So I got to see really the life cycle, the enthusiasm, the rewards, and the challenges in developing a new technology. I was hooked. I went away, I continued for a couple of years as a postdoc exploring some other electrochemical technologies, solar water splitting. But eventually when I came back to start my faculty position, I thought, what do I really, now that I've kind of seen this portfolio of technologies, what challenges do I really want to bring my knowledge to bear on? And I wound up coming back to lithium-ion batteries and beyond lithium-ion chemistries, which is what we're working on today. And this was not necessarily an easy choice. So this is it's an old field. It's a very old technology. I would say there's not so much low-hanging fruit anymore. This is a decades old. The lithium-ion research field spans decades, just immensely broad and deep. And the challenges, pushing forward and finding new chemistries requires thinking out of the box, taking some leaps, and being willing to go down some paths that are not yet illuminated. I mean, that's what research really is. But especially for a young faculty member, those factors combine, and there are well-meaning mentors who will say, maybe you shouldn't go be working in an area that's so crowded. Think about your career and what's exactly the right moment for this idea and so on. And so what brings me here is that I believe this is really the most important problem to be working on, and it's the one where I can make the most difference with my skill set. And I think one theme that has really defined my academic experience so far, and that I try to teach my students, is really run towards and embrace the challenges, the problems that are hard. Work on and run for the problems that are really hard. The technology is a beautiful one, but I'm still captivated by this question that I don't yet have an answer to. Why don't we have a better battery? And I think this question has captivated so many people and still motivates so many people. Scientifically, there are a lot of ways to answer and discuss about that. If we think about the technology, it's served us so well in some aspects. It's changed all of our lives in terms of portability, in terms of laptops and cell phones. We've managed to bring the technology into mobility and electrified vehicles, transportation. To some extent, that's been a lot of really excellent engineering. At the chemistry level, there's still a lot to do. We know what the issues are, but the challenges really require a lot of hard work. And I tell my students, look out on the street. There's sort of the science news you can read that has a lot of excitement. Here's new technologies coming out of the lab. But if you look at your day-to-day experience, where are these new technologies? There's a lag, right? We need to do the hard work to actually bring these conceive of new ideas, explore them, understand their viability, and bring them out into the real world. And that's not going to be an easy 2 or 3 year solution. That's going to be something that you need to be willing to work on for a decade or more. But those are the problems that are worth working on, and that's what's going to have an impact for us. So what we do in my group, we are working on some advanced chemistries, I will say. We've developed a couple of new and explored a couple of new electrochemical systems, 2 new primary systems in the past couple of years, and 1 rechargeable system where we're looking at sort of pushing beyond the materials that we use today. We're really concerned with the cost, the toxicity, sustainability of transition metals like cobalt. So I fully agree with Catherine. We're really taking a hard look at how we can improve materials based on manganese, for example. We're doing a lot with manipulating materials based on magnesium or calcium, so that we can start to look at energy storage systems that we don't really mind, or we can conceive of a safe end-of-life application for. So.
Betar, just a quick question. Are you optimizing these new chemistries for a particular application?
Yep. So we've actually taken 2 different approaches. So we have kind of a portfolio of different research projects. Some of those are looking at starting from materials we would like to use in, I would say, maybe a little bit more conventional intercalation type materials, but looking at replacing the transition metal. But also, how can we design interfaces and actually the chemistry of these active materials to improve long-term cyclability when we take the cobalt out and replace it with other things. So that's one set of projects. But another projects that we've looked at is actually sort of really looking at alternative chemistries altogether. So I work with conversion-based materials. So that's instead of looking at reversibly storing lithium ions in a material, we're looking at reactions where you have phase changes. Gas to solid, gas to liquid, solid to liquid, and so on. Big potential, but a lot of challenges, and we're looking at try to address those.
So for application, I mean like multi-day storage, long duration, or as a better battery to put in a vehicle, or all of the above?
We're looking at electric vehicle to kind of grid scale application.
Okay. Thank you. So huge innovation on the business side. Thank you. innovation and in the laboratory, and then finally we have market and regulatory innovation.
Yeah, very different story and path. So this is so much fun, and I'm so delighted to be here. This is a really inspiring group of people, and I love seeing all these young women in this field. It's super inspiring. So I'll have to start at the very beginning of my childhood. I swear I won't tell my whole life story, but two things that I remember. One is, I grew up in the 1970s, and I well remember the first Earth Day and the solar panels on the White House, and somehow those got embedded in my brain and sort of an environmental consciousness at a young age. And then I went off to college in Minnesota and started to participate in some things that were going on there around energy. And I found out that we still had energy systems that still had some pollution problems. And I was like, really? I thought we had fixed all that like 20 years ago or whatever. So I was a little disillusioned. And I think that stayed with me until today, because I'm still kind of impatient to fix that and to get to that clean energy future that a lot of us dream of. So fast forward, I went to law school. I wasn't sure what my career path was going to be. Both my parents were chemical engineers, but nope, I was a history major. So got my law degree, and then I was inspired by a professor and mentor of mine, Senator Paul Wellstone, and decided to run for office. So in 1992, I ran for state senate in Minnesota. I was elected and served for 18 years, which I never planned to do. Sorry, cough drop. And along the way, I worked on lots and lots of different things as a senator that mattered a lot to me and my constituencies, and that I'm really proud of. But my passion for clean energy became a key part of my identity and of my work all through that time. And I'll just give you one quick story because it sort of lays the foundation for where I am now and the work on storage. So I worked for many years on trying to pass a renewable portfolio standard for Minnesota. And I remember back only 17 years ago, in 2001, energy experts and engineers and utility folks and lobbyists coming to the Capitol and testifying that the maximum amount of renewable energy that we could have integrated into our electricity grid was somewhere between 1% and 3%. Mm-hmm. And they were the experts. And so it took a really long time to get legislators and lobbyists and utilities and others to make that leap of faith, to say that we're going to try, we think it's reasonable to try to aim for 20% or 25%. And in 2007, we finally passed that 25% renewable energy requirement. So it took a very long time. But looking backwards, one thing that was so prevalent in that discussion is, everyone said it's not politically feasible, it's not technically possible, and it'll cost too much. And everybody talked about energy storage. That was the holy grail for really being able to scale up renewable energy, so it wasn't just a niche kind of idea. And so, again, that planted a big seed in my head as a big supporter of renewable energy development. So fast forward, I worked, after the legislature, the governor appointed me to chair the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, and then after that I worked for Governor Dayton as an energy advisor, and then I had an opportunity to move to the University of Minnesota 4 years ago and to run this energy program, and I seized it. It was so exciting. An opportunity to really just innovate and experiment with different ideas. So I run a program called the Energy Transition Lab. We don't have test tubes in our lab. It's more a regulatory policy and law kind of innovation, but we work on a multidisciplinary basis across the university with experts and with stakeholders around, especially Minnesota. And we've just adopted a goal at our center, which is that we're going to help advance Minnesota to become a prosperous and equitable carbon neutral economy, just that small ambitious goal. And we want to do that in a way that is, we want to try to work towards models that other states, especially in the vast heartland of America, can also work towards, so that we can learn from each other and share examples, because there's lots of the United States that is not as far as California is in some of these areas of decarbonization and energy innovation. So we need a lot of models that will work all across America. And so I'm really dedicated to that work. So one of the things I started working on in 2015 was energy storage. And I guess the reason really it popped up was nobody else was doing it. Nobody was talking about it. And it seemed logical because there was suddenly activity going on around the country in the industry, in research, in deployment, in cost savings were starting to be evident. And so we held an energy storage summit and invited Janice to be our keynote. And so that just started everything. And it was a really exciting time because what I found is that there was this huge pent-up interest among stakeholders around the state of Minnesota and the Midwest to have a conversation about what are the capabilities of this technology? How can we deploy it? Why would we want to? Does it work here? Would it be a good fit for our energy systems? If so, why? And so we had lots of stakeholders who said, let's keep talking about this, and we ended up using that to form the Minnesota Energy Storage Alliance. And it was a very robust group that included stakeholders from utility companies, renewable energy companies, state officials, and Public Utilities Commission staff and academics and others all working together to figure out what could we learn about storage. And we hosted a series of high-level workshops, again with support from Janice and her team, to really help educate Minnesotans about what they need to know about this topic. And so I guess the biggest lesson learned for me during that whole process is that you have to seize upon these topics and these ideas that are really sort of ahead of where everybody else is, and jump in head first. And that's how you're going to make change. And that people, if you can bring them together and collaborate, people really do want to learn. And during that sort of experience that I had at the Capitol in trying to persuade people and open their minds and change their minds, it occurred to me that, you know, they may be experts, but that doesn't mean they're right about, especially about the future. They just may not see what can change and be possible in the future. And so trying to focus on that is a really key part of making change to me. So I think energy storage is starting to grow in our area, and we're really excited that some of our work has instigated some major projects and a great deal of interest at our Public Utilities Commission, at the legislature and beyond, and with companies to try to advance energy storage so that we can take advantage of its benefits. And I'll say that we just met our renewable energy standards 7 years ahead of schedule. So we're now at 25% renewable electricity, thank you, yay, in Minnesota. And we're like a lot of parts of the country, we're moving ahead on integrating large amounts of renewable energy, and all of our smart utilities and grid operators have figured out how to integrate that, and they're going to need storage to really make it work over time. And we're going to need storage to have that clean, flexible, distributed low-carbon grid that is our future that I'm going to keep working for. And hopefully I will be able to retire before it's, by the time it's done. I won't be too old.
I am just fascinated by the vision and the leadership by each one of you. I get so much energy. This is such an amazing panel that's been assembled. We have business leadership and innovation that's saving the world, triple bottom line, technical engineering advancement and inventing new storage solutions that can be applied in many aspects of our lives today, changing the world, and then policy innovation. And the interesting thing, and I'm realizing, I'm wishing we had another half hour to keep this panel here, is we probably won't get to very many questions. We have 6 minutes. I just want to check in to got it. So I'm getting the nod. The topic of this session was scaling energy storage. And I think each one of your stories was a story of inspiration, innovation, and courage. So I think what might be interesting to hear from each of you before we close out to this audience is, given that storage is so important to a cleaner future, what advice from each of your perspectives, business, technical, policy innovation, do you have to this crowd for how these guys can get involved and have impact in their own right? So in energy storage, and to be innovative and take a chance. Anyone want to start?
Oh, just on tying that into the message of scaling, I think in energy storage or any type of generation asset, we talk about scaling as if scaling is bigger is better. And all over the world, we're seeing the impact of climate change. And when we have large distribution systems, bigger is not necessarily better, where transmission lines and distribution is breaking down and putting millions of people at risk. In California, of course, we've gone through our own fires. Utilities are shutting the grid off in times of high winds. So going to this idea of scaling, and I said before, we work with utilities, not just in the US, but over in New Zealand, in South and Central America as well. The proposition isn't an either or zero-sum game. It's a false choice. We have a distribution grid. We have centralized infrastructure. Let's optimize it. We also have communities that are left out of the economy all over the world, but in the US as well. And so let's optimize those communities. And by combining distributed generation and storage, we create resilience in local communities, and we create that active participation in the generation of resources. It allows utilities to shut the grid off when winds are 75 miles an hour and there's a drought, and they can shut the utility off and still people have power. It's about these partnerships, and I feel that in business and research and policy, it's a top-down, bottom-up approach. It has to be. And these kinds of partnerships amongst all stakeholders in the energy industry are so critical, and that's what we are constantly trying to forge through projects and actual deployments. So that's my view on scaling, and the idea of community, the farm to table. Think about it in terms of energy. The more local the resources and the asset, the more secure you are. And then just in general, one of the points in terms of this conference and meeting such amazing women and some of the conversations I've had is really to just, for me, it's been a lesson in being mindful of what my core values are and what my worldview is, and finding a way to execute on that and operationalize it. And in business, we have such an opportunity, but also a responsibility when we talk about the stratification in terms of economic well-being. Companies have a chance to make a difference in that. We legislate for minimum wage, legislate for maximum wage. I'm very unpopular amongst other CEOs, but and that ties into this issue of scaling a company. If I'm concerned about equity and impact, not just on our customers and the communities we work with, but in the company, our manufacturing team is the core of the company. They work with the R&D and the manufacturing, and innovation is going on in the manufacturing all the time. So this whole idea of equity and parity, I think we have to think about it much more so than just our consumer, our marketing, and our branding, but from our supply chain to the innovation and looking at the overall impact in a much more holistic way.
And it sounds like it starts with ourselves, right?
Yes.
With right here. Dylan, do you want to go
Can I
next?
jump in? I was just want to grab onto the word stakeholders that you talked about in collaboration, because that's a big part of kind of the secret sauce, I think, to being able to be successful and try to advance ideas forward. And it's, often think about in any kind of energy innovation problem, the answers are not simply technology. They're also policy, they're also markets, and they're also whatever the social conditions are of the people. And those are all intersectional, and we have to account for all of them to really create good solutions. And to get those perspectives, we're going to find better solutions. I love the phrase, which I use a lot, none of us is as smart as all of us, right? And it's really true that we can come up with some new ideas together. And I think there's no So when you want to get people to innovate, you have to bring them together and share ideas, and light bulbs will go off, but you also have to try things. And I know, Janice, that's one of your mantras, and I want to call out Commissioner Peterman, since she's still here as well. One of the things we did in our storage work was bring a delegation to the West Coast to really learn about energy storage and microgrids, including some PUC commissioners and university facilities people and utility people, and we met with Commissioner Peterman was very generous with her time despite just having had a baby. And one of the things that you said that we repeat over and over is that you said, with California's success in energy storage and passing strong policies, it started with pilot projects, with trying things, with demonstrations, with trying out different uses to see how it would work. So people could kick the tires, they could believe that some things could be done that they had never experienced before. And I think that is really, it's a simple concept, but that's what gets people over the hump sometimes, in that sort of skepticism, that they're stuck in their own kind of thinking. So that's really important.
Thank you. It's a great lesson. Finally, Betar.
Something I spend a lot of time thinking about is how do we engage young students to work on these types of challenges, but also how do we prepare them adequately to be really well equipped by the time they're in the laboratory and they have those good years as students ahead of them. How do we really give them the best experience and also give them the tools of preparation and engage them so that they find something that they're passionate about and they know enough about it and they have the skill set to really get to work and start to get the positive feedback before they leave the university. Right? That's where the love of research can take hold once you've gotten through the I'm a technician kind of stage, I'm an apprentice. And when you start to see the beauty of an individual being able to pose and answer questions, it's incredibly empowering. And I had the advantage, I was very fortunate to be able to have that experience really early on as an undergraduate. But I know a lot of students don't necessarily get that hook. And I think there's a lot of potential out there that really, hopefully, we could find better ways to engage and bring some creative thinking to bear on these challenges. So clean energy, energy storage, these are not majors, right? These are not something, areas that a student can go in and declare, I want to work on that. It needs to be more finely honed than that. And there needs to be a technical underpinning, like mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, chemistry, all of these areas, materials, policy, et cetera. There are so many ways to approach these challenges. I think we're doing a great job at the university level, helping to direct students, increasingly so, to work in these areas. As I tell my undergraduates and my graduate students, but my undergraduates in particular, I teach thermodynamics, so usually after the first exam, or even the second exam, some of them are feeling disappointed, it was really hard, they didn't do as well as they wanted to, and I try to remind them, it's not you haven't failed, this is really hard stuff. It's hard for everybody, even people who are going to get A+. It's hard for all of us when we learn it. There's no kind of shortchanging or taking a shortcut in this material. Try to embrace that and take that feeling and be motivated by it. And also remember, this is the kind of hard work that's going to get you to contributing to energy storage, energy in general. Get it at the technical level, whatever that technical level is, down in the weeds, whether it's engineering, whether it's science, whether it's policy, whether it's entrepreneurship. How do we sort of push that pipeline earlier? Because I think people really want to engage, and it's just a matter of, are we really giving them the buffet of options to really enable them to do that early on?
Thank you. So we're unfortunately out of time. I do want to encourage all of you to continue learning about storage. Feel free to contact me, any one of us, afterwards, because this field is a game changer and needs so much help. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you, guys.